Welcome to the VAWA Grant Management Workshop. I'm Kristen Wood-Hegner, the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, Grant Administrator with the New Mexico Crime Victims Reparation Commission, or CVRC. The CVRC Grants Department also includes Bureau Chief Donna Richmond, VOCA Grant Administrator Lourdes McKenna, State Grant Administrator Maribel Baca, and Grant Program Specialists Jackie Mascarenas and Sadie Sires. We're excited to have you join us today to learn more about grant management. This workshop will cover the following topics: an overview of CVRC, your VAWA contract and special conditions, financial management including invoices, budget revisions, and your match requirements, grant management requirements like time and attendance, travel, contracts, downloads, and progress reporting, grant fraud, waste, and abuse, and civil rights. You can download the PowerPoint using the link in the description, and remember to complete the survey as a record of your attendance. CVRC requires the financial planner, the authorized individual, and the program manager to participate in this workshop. In 1981, the New Mexico legislature created the Crime Victims Reparation Commission as an agency led by a governor-appointed commission with 5 members to assist victims of violent crime. CVRC's mission is to ensure that victims of violent crime don't experience financial hardship because of their victimization. And our compensation department provides reimbursement for eligible expenses related to the crime, like funeral expenses, medical expenses, and loss of wages. We are the payer of last resort, meaning that we will only pay what is remaining after other sources of payment, such as health insurance, have been exhausted. The CVRC Grants Department also supports victims and their families by administering federal and state funds to support programs like yours throughout the state. We're committed to providing you with the support you need to be successful. We also assist your agencies in meeting your sub-grant requirements, such as reporting and invoicing, and we have a strong internal control system in place to demonstrate to the federal government that funds are used appropriately. We offer training, technical assistance, and funding to help our sub-grantees provide quality services to victims of crime. In fact, you may find any one of our Grants Department team members assisting you because we assign invoicing and reporting on a rotating basis. This ensures that no one person is always responsible for the same tasks, and each item is viewed by multiple people, which federal auditors appreciate because it improves compliance with grant conditions. Today, we're specifically talking about the federal funding that CVRC receives from 2 programs established in the Violence Against Women Act. The first is the Sexual Assault Services Formula Program, SASP, which supports programs that provide direct services to victims of sexual violence. And the second is the Services, Training, Officers, Prosecutors Formula Grant Program, or STOP, which supports programs addressing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. In January, CVRC issued a Request for Proposals, or RFP, for continuation in competitive applications for VAWA funds in compliance with the State of New Mexico's procurement regulations. A peer review committee of Violence Against Women experts who are not receiving funds from our office reviewed and scored the applications using the criteria in the RFP. The committee then made recommendations to the CVRC Commission based on the scores and availability of funding. The recommendations were presented at the April Commission meeting for preliminary approval. CVRC notified awardees and provided a preliminary award letter by email. The Commission gave final approval in the May Commission meeting, and awardees were notified by email with their final award letter and contract. Subgrantees should maintain both the preliminary and final award letters on file for CVRC site visits and federal audits. Your preliminary award letter may have contained requests for information or revisions, such as an updated budget or corrected lobbying form. It also included information on the protest period. Between the preliminary award and final award, CVRC supports awardees in meeting these special conditions to ensure that the funded projects meet the award's intent, especially with budgets and primary project components. Budgets should be realistic and not overinflate what can be accomplished with this funding, because CVRC needs to share accurate information with the Federal Office on Violence Against Women, or OVW. For example, we should accurately communicate how many victims can be served by a part-time advocate in a rural community. Accurate data can also be leveraged to request additional funding. CVRC wants to ensure that these goals and objectives reflect what the funds can support and meaningfully address gender-based violence in the state. Your final award letter includes the amount awarded to your agency, your required match amount, and the year of your continuation funding. CVRC awards VAWA subrecipients on 4-year funding cycles that are contingent on maintaining good standing and submission of an annual application. Please remember that there is a 10% reduction in year 3 and an additional 10% reduction in year 4. Awards in year 4 will need to apply as a new applicant next year to be considered for continued VAWA funding. Your award letter may have also included special conditions for additional monitoring and technical assistance. These special conditions ensure that we are responsible and accountable for the funding, that we're able to demonstrate our fiscal prudence to the federal government and auditors, and that we help at-risk agencies develop the organizational capacity to stabilize. If there are additional monitoring requirements in your award letter, please make sure that the individuals responsible for meeting those requirements are aware. All STOP VAWA subgrantees are guaranteed to submit monthly invoices with support documentation, which the Grants Department reviews. We cannot process and reimburse an invoice lacking the required documentation. We'll discuss invoices in more detail later in this presentation. CVRC conducts in-person site visits with our subgrantees, and we will send the agency a pre-visit questionnaire with detailed questions regarding policies and compliance. Next, we'll go over your grant conditions. If you have not yet signed your contract, please do so through DocuSign or email it to cvrc.grants@cvrc.nm.gov. Please don't hesitate to ask us for assistance. Reimbursement or payment against invoices cannot be processed until a signed contract is in WebGrants and the first invoice is due in August. On the first page of the contract, you can find the Federal Award Program, STOP or SASP, the Federal Award Number, the amount of your award, and your award period, which is the New Mexico state fiscal year beginning July 1st of this year and ending June 30th of next year. It also reminds you that payment is by reimbursement only. Please review all conditions listed in your contract. It is important to remain compliant because these conditions are required by the Code of Federal Regulations, the Violence Against Women Act, the Office on Violence Against Women, the conditions of the federal award, and state laws. When CVRC or federal auditors review programs, they are looking for compliance with these conditions. Now, we want to highlight some of these conditions. Provision 4 of the contract states that this agreement can be terminated by the parties just like any other contract. You have to maintain your records, and CVRC, DOJ, and OVW can inspect them. You cannot transfer this award without CVRC approval. Any amendments must be submitted through WebGrants for approval, and you must comply with equal opportunity employment laws. On the next page, you'll see that the primary project components, or PPCs, in your proposal are your scope of work. Also, you must notify CVRC of staff changes and provide resumes of project staff. Your direct service staff must attend at least one CVRC training on victim compensation, and you can find the dates and links to those trainings at cvrc.nm.gov. You must also coordinate with other VAWA-funded programs and providers in your area. If you're providing direct services to victims, your agency agrees that you will inform all potentially eligible victims and assist them in filing for victim compensation and assist in the submission of their compensation application. You also agree to notify and assist victims with VINE, the Automated Victim Notification System. If you would like more information on VINE, please reach out to our office. You must post your grievance policies where they are easily seen, and failure to comply or providing false information may result in withholding funds, suspending or terminating the contract, legal action, or prosecution. You must let us know if an agency deems you to be high risk, and CVRC may add additional requirements to the funding. You must also comply with all applicable sections of 34 U.S. Code 12291B, including Section 13, which prohibits discrimination, We'll talk more about this in detail later in the presentation. These funds cannot be used to lobby, but may assist in the development of state or local policies in accordance with USC 12291A. You agree to comply with the DOJ Financial Guide and Part 200 uniform requirements. You must also report potentially duplicative funding to CVRC. Out-of-state travel must be approved by CVRC ahead of time, and you must ensure you're not commingling funds, so you have to have a good accounting system. You cannot supplant federal funds, meaning you can't redirect or reduce the state or local funds that you're receiving because you think the VAWA grant could cover that expense. Payment is by reimbursement only. We reimburse for expenses from the prior month. Invoices for expenditures are due to our office by the 10th of the month. If the 10th is a holiday or a weekend, then it would be the following business day. Because of state requirements and the end of the fiscal year, the June invoices are always due a little earlier in July. If applicable, please read through the requirements related to program income, specific approval on training project budgets, and the federal limit on the consultant rates. We cannot support the purchase of food for meetings, conferences, or trainings. However, we do have some programs that support food for victims related to shelter programs. Promptly refer not only to the Department of Justice, but our office as well if there's any credible evidence of actual or perceived fraud, waste, abuse, or misconduct, or if you suspect a program may be potentially discriminating against clients or is not able to provide assistance to clients. We want you to share these concerns with our office so that we can look into them, provide technical assistance if necessary, or prevent further harm. If you're not in compliance with regulations and your contractual obligations, there can be consequences from CVRC or the federal government, including being deemed high risk and having additional conditions added to your grant. There are many provisions regarding civil rights and discrimination against employees and the people you're serving. We'll go into those in more detail in a little bit, but just briefly, your applications were required to account for access needs for participants with disabilities, disabled participants, participants who have limited English proficiency, and deaf and hard of hearing participants. By signing this contract, you agree to not compromise victim safety and their recovery. Both OVW and CVRC monitor this. OVW does not allow funding of anger management programs for offenders or pre-prosecution diversion projects. There are also specific requirements around confidentiality that continue into the conditions of 54, 51, and 61 in your contract. If your award is funding a training program or training project, you must adhere to the training guidelines. This must be submitted to CVRC at least 30 days prior for review. If you have material or publication funded by this award, it needs the language here that it doesn't reflect the opinions of our office or the Department of Justice. If you are providing legal assistance, please read Condition 64 that details all of the specific requirements for those programs. The Department of Justice requires that you must ensure human trafficking is not happening in your organization or at any level of the project, and suspected trafficking must be reported. Finally, if you're being sued, you cannot use VAWA funds to pay for litigation expenses. There is a prohibition on tort litigation. If you have any questions about any of these conditions, please reach out to our office. Semi-annual reporting is submitted through web grants, and you will receive an email reminder when it's time to submit. These are based on the annually required federal reporting requirements. Most of these questions will not apply to your agency, depending on your funded project, but it is good to look through these reporting forms now so you know what kind of data you should be collecting and you can start asking questions early. You can look at the reporting forms in web grants now. When the annual report is due in February, you'll be able to sum up the numbers from the web grants reports from the previous calendar year and then apply them to the annual report. To submit a report in web grants, click Grants on the left sidebar. Then click into the grant that you'd like to make a report on. Scroll down to see the components of the grant and click into Status Reports. To start a new report, click the green Add Status Report button. Then, click into the subtype and select Quarterly Report. If you're reporting on one quarter, identify that quarter. If you're submitting a semi-annual report, identify both quarters. Then select the start and end date that you're reporting on. So if we're doing the first semi-annual report, that's July 1st through December 31st. Next, you'll see that we have submitted the general information, so there's a green check mark indicating that it's complete. Before you submit, you'll want all green check marks for each of these components. Next, we'll look at purpose area. Scroll down and you'll see all the different VAWA purpose areas, and you'll have to indicate for each one if your funded project is supporting that purpose area. There needs to be a response to each of these purpose areas before you can move on. Now we click the green Save Form button, and we click Mark as Complete. And that takes us back to the components page, and you can see there's a green check mark, and we can move on to function areas. The first question is training, so if we use stop funds for training, we'll say yes, and additional questions drop down. If no, the questions disappear. You can scroll down and see more questions about training. We didn't do training, so we're not going to answer those. Click Save Form. And then we can click Mark as Complete, but we got a pop-up meaning we skipped required questions. So we click OK, and then we need to click Edit Form again, and we'll scroll down, and we will look for red text indicating that it was a required question. We can see that the Coordinated Community Response section is required. So we'll go into each of these and indicate how often we interact with these different agencies. And we'll do that for each one. And we'll scroll down and we can see there are additional sections that we didn't complete. Policies. Again, you'll get the drop-down menu if you say yes. Products. Data collection and communication systems, specialized unit, system improvement. And again, if you say yes, you'll get more drop-down questions. Now we mark as complete. And there's a green check mark. Now we'll click into Victim Services. If this doesn't apply to your program, you still have to answer this question. So we'll say no, Save Form, Mark is Complete, and the green check mark appears. We'll do it again for each one of these components, whether or not they apply. Law enforcement, we can say no, Save Form, Mark is Complete, and we have the green check mark. Let's say we're doing a prosecution project. So we'll scroll down, click Yes. And then we'll see multiple fields to enter our data. This data should reflect stop funded activities as well as match activities for the reporting period only. You'll see there are multiple sections. All of these are required if this portion was funded by STOP. Each section also has narrative questions along with quantitative data. Then you get to the bottom and click Save Form. And then mark is complete. Double check. Now we have done all these sections. They all have green check marks, and everyone will complete this narrative section. This first question only needs to be completed in the final report, but you can choose to submit there if you would like. And once you complete those, you'll click Save Form, and then mark is complete. Finally, we have the staff information section. And here you'll enter in your organization name, followed by your grant number. That'll start with a year, followed by WF if it's STOP, and then a 3-digit number. You'll select what type of organization you are from the drop-down and answer the following questions. Then enter your contact information for the point of contact, and again for your agency. Once that's complete, you scroll down. Next, enter the percentage of funds that was directed toward addressing each of these crimes. And scroll down and click Save Form. Then there's another section below that regarding staff. Click Edit Form. Scroll down again. Select Yes if these funds were used to pay for staff or contractors. We'll enter the FTE or full-time equivalent for each of the profession categories that are funded by the VAWA grant. So for example, if we had an attorney that was funded half-time on the grant, a counselor that was funded full-time on the grant, court personnel that was funded a quarter-time on the grant, we would write them as decimals. Click Save Form. Other requires a response, so we can say NA. Save Form. Scroll down, and we can see that it has totaled our FTE there at 1.75. So mark is complete. And now all our sections have a green check mark, meaning we are ready to submit. Click Submit Status Reports. We get a pop-up to confirm, and we click Submit. Now you have been awarded funds specifically to implement the project using the budget to meet the objectives and goals in your proposal. If your activities are within these boundaries and not subject to one of the contract conditions we just talked about, then you can take action without requesting additional permission. However, if your activities deviate from one of these constraints, it's grant fraud. Fraud isn't always intentional. It can be accidental, a slippery slope of misuse and mismanagement of funds, or even well-intended. Even in these instances, there can be fiscal and criminal consequences. So the CVRC Grants Department staff want to help you mitigate these risks. An example is conflict of interest in the procurement process. As a subgrantee receiving federal funds, you should make decisions free of undisclosed personal or organizational conflicts of interest, both in fact and in appearance. So perception matters. When purchasing goods or services, like training or consultation, from a relative or a business associate, subgrantees must follow proper procurement, meaning follow the laws and your agency's policies and procedures. An example of a conflict of interest is securing a trainer because you've known them for 20 years without soliciting for the position by properly issuing a request for training proposals. You have potentially excluded equally or better qualified candidates. Vendor selection must be fair and transparent, and the selected vendors must have reasonable rates and specific verifiable work products. Lying or failing to report means unilaterally redirecting the use of funds. For example, if you're funded to provide a particular program, but then decide to change your programming without prior permission. If this happens, CVRC will try to help agencies resolve the issue. However, sometimes agencies redirect funds to ineligible activities or purchases, and they cannot be reimbursed for those expenses. You must also be able to adequately account for transactions and represent the eligibility of funding. So keep good records of documentation related to transactions and expenditures. If you have a question about allowable costs, please reach out to our office. To prevent fraud, examine your programs, policies, and procedures to identify vulnerabilities. CVRC looks at these during site visits, and we can identify vulnerabilities and make recommendations based on other programs we've assisted with fraud prevention strategies and to establish well-designed and tested systems of internal controls. For example, it's risky to assign a single staff person to open mail, reconcile the accounting system, deposit checks, and write checks for the agency, because that person has a lot of power with little oversight to prevent conflicts of interest, procurement violations, and other types of fraud, waste, and abuse. Agencies should have fully documented and proper procurement policies and procedures that are administered across the agency, not just to the VAWA-funded segments. If you have unrestricted funds that don't require a procurement policy, but your agency does have a procurement policy, then you're federally required to follow that procurement policy even with those unrestricted funds. Adhering to an agency-wide procurement policy also demonstrates that you're being good stewards of other funds. Now let's talk about match requirements. Victim service providers using this award to provide direct services are not required to provide match. Some additional subgrantees received a match waiver. All other subgrantees, including all governmental subgrantees, are required to provide a 25% match of the total budget for stop-funded projects. If you are not meeting your match obligation, CVRC cannot release the funds. Agencies that do not properly match stop funds are contractually required to reimburse CVRC. If you get a $25,000 award, your match would be a little over $8,000. If you expend $20,000 of the stop funds, but only match with $3,000, you would have to pay back the funds that you didn't match, which would be about $11,000. Invoices are submitted monthly through the Grant Management System web grants at nmcvrcgrants.com, and they're due on the 10th of each month, unless the 10th falls on a weekend or holiday. Your first invoice for July is due in August. If an invoice is submitted late, you may need to wait for reimbursement until the following month. Templates for the accounting sheet and time and activity sheet can be downloaded from our website under Documents to Download. CVRC staff will check the line items against your budget, your documentation, and what you have submitted in web grants. So please make sure all of those align. To submit an invoice in web grants, go to Grants and then click the grant that you want to submit an invoice for. Click Invoices, add claim. It'll be for reimbursement. Your first invoice will be for July 1st through July 31st, and click Save Form. Now there's a check mark there for that component. Click Reimbursement. And now you'll see the budget from your proposal. This budget has 2 positions. One is vacant, one is filled. So we're going to go to edit reimbursement. Vacant, we're not going to have an expense there. Staff person. This will be their salary. And then we want to do it for the same staff person, their benefits. So, 200, save reimbursement. And now you'll see subtotals for expenses this period. These are the subtotals that you want to make sure match your other documents and match your accounting sheets. This is something that CVRC will look for when we're reviewing your invoices. So we'll mark as complete. Okay, takes me back here, invoice supporting documentation. This is where you would upload, you'd say add new attachment and upload a file for your timesheet, your receipts, any invoices from a contractor. You would mark as complete. Won't let me mark it because I don't have anything submitted. Go next. Okay. Invoice advice. This is where you'll upload your accounting sheet. Please upload your accounting sheet as an Excel document. You can write notes in the margins if an explanation is needed for one of your expenditures. We recommend showing your work. Use formulas instead of just entering a number directly into a cell. That way the grants department staff can see what you were doing. When that's done, you can go back to your claims list. And these will all have check marks. And then you'll have a submit button. Please check for common errors before submitting an invoice. Make sure you have enough funds left in your budget so that an expenditure will not cause one of your line items to be overdrawn and go into the negative. Check that the supporting time and attendance reports match the pay rate, hours, and staff that are in your budget, and that the dates in your accounting sheet match pay stubs and receipts. And check that all the subtotals and web grants match the subtotals on the accounting sheet. If you need to adjust your budget, please wait to submit your invoice until your budget revision request has been processed. Budget revision requests are submitted through web grants. You'll go to grants, click the grant that you want to revise the budget for. Scroll down to contract amendments, not budget. I know it's confusing. Contract amendments, add amendment. This will be a budget revision. Add title. Let's say there's a staff change. Let's say we filled that position. Okay, budget revision, vacant advocate position filled. Now you'll enter the details of what your new budget will look like. You'll start with requested budget amendments, and you'll put in what the subtotals of each of these categories should be in your new budget. And scroll down. This budget narrative adjustment will be more detailed than what we've already written. So for example, this is a staff change. So I want to put the new staff person's name, how many hours a week they're working, 40 hours a week on VAWA. If we were doing a match, we would write the match here. So if they were doing 20 on VAWA, 20 on our match, we would write that. We'll put the rate. So we say $20 an hour. And any other details, of course, what their position is. They would be the victim advocate. If you're moving funds from one category to another, so let's say you had in-state travel, but you want to go to an out-of-state conference, you would write those details here. You'd write the information about the conference, where you're going, and you would specify we want to move this line item, the funds in this line item, from in-state to out-of-state. And scroll down. And this budget will be automatically generated. This is what your current budget is. And you want to double check that the totals here, sorry, not the totals here. You want to double check that the total program budget here, these ones, so your federal,
your match and your total, that matches what you have up here in your totals. So the totals for your requested budget amendment should match the totals in your current budget, even if your subcategories are changing. And then you'll add your documentation. So for our example, with our new staff coming in, we would want to add their resume. This is where you would add your budget amendment sheet that you can download on CVRC's website, and it's linked in the description. And then every time you make a change, you want to click Save Grid, Save Form. Go back to the amendment list. Then if I had submitted the documents, we would have a check there, and we would be able to submit here.
To learn more about invoices, budget revisions, and navigating web grants, please watch the web grants playlist on the CVRC YouTube channel. If you have any questions when working on an invoice or considering a budget revision, please do not hesitate to contact the CVRC Grants Department. We're here to help you. Consultants and other contractual services are required to submit contracts that specify the start date, end date, hourly rate, number of hours, and a description of services. The contract must be signed by both parties. Please submit contracts to CVRC for review prior to execution to ensure adherence to federal guidelines. Programs and projects that receive funding through CVRC must meaningfully collaborate with community partners providing services to victims of crime, particularly law enforcement, courts, prosecutors, and victim service providers. It's important to build collaborative relationships to leverage all the resources available to victims of crime. Now we'll cover the civil rights obligations in your contracts, including compliance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Safe Streets Act, the Victims of Crime Act, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Age Discrimination Act, Title IX, and the U.S. Department of Justice regulations on equal treatment for faith-based organizations. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act states that no person in the United States shall, on the grounds of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation and denied the benefits in or subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal funding. The Victims of Crime Act requires no person on the grounds of race, color, religion, national origin, disability, or sex be discriminated against or denied access. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act protects disabled individuals and individuals with physical or mental disabilities that substantially limit one or more life activities, have a record of impairment, or regarded as having an impairment. It also requires large agencies and agencies receiving high levels of federal funding to have a compliance coordinator. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, also protects disabled individuals and individuals with physical or mental disabilities, including the deaf and hard of hearing, who are also protected under the limited English proficiency requirements. The Age Discrimination Act protects individuals from being denied services based upon age. The Educational Amendment of 1972 regards discrimination in educational programs receiving federal funding. That's Title IX. The Equal Treatment of Faith-Based Organizations prohibits discrimination against organizations on the basis of religion, defined as any religious practice or sincerely held moral or ethical belief. The Violence Against Women Act extends protections, saying no one on the basis of actual or perceived race, color, religion, national origin, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, or disability shall be excluded. VAWA also explains that if sex segregation or sex-specific programming is necessary to the essential operation of a program, nothing in this paragraph shall prevent any such program or activity. But you must provide services comparable to those being excluded. The entire agency is subject to these civil rights obligations, not just the federally funded staff members or programs. The following are examples of civil rights violations. A funded domestic violence clinic has a blanket policy of only providing services to female victims of domestic violence and not victims of other genders. Male employees at a funded detention center sexually harass female occupants. A culturally based sexual assault program primarily designed to provide services to Latina individuals turns away individuals of other ethnicities seeking services. As a CVRC funding recipient, you must provide reasonable accommodations for disabilities, in addition to ensuring reasonable access to individuals regardless of their race, color, national origin, religion, gender, age, sexual orientation, and gender identity. CVRC is required to monitor your organization's civil rights compliance by looking at your policies and procedures, such as who do you report civil rights violations to? How do you train staff and volunteers on civil rights? How do you inform clients about filing a grievance? When you receive a complaint, are you forwarding it to EEOC, the Office for Civil Rights, and CVRC? CVRC has clear policies and procedures that explain how an individual can complain directly to our office, how we will refer the complaint, and how we will acknowledge and train on the requirements related to the complaint. CVRC has a 501 coordinator to ensure programs meet the OCR requirements. We have grievance policies, limited English proficiency policies, statements that our programs are aware of these various civil rights compliance policies, and these assurances are in our subgrantee contracts. One of your grant requirements is to download CVRC's civil rights policies from the Documents to Download section of our website. You can find a link to the website in the description of this video. You're also required to disseminate these policies appropriately throughout your organization, and your authorized official must email cvrc.grants@cvrc.nm.gov to say that you have received these policies. Before you close this video, please remember to complete the survey using the link in the description to document your attendance. And email the Grants Department at cvrc.grants@cvrc.nm.gov to let us know you attended. This is a requirement of the grant. You'll find a link to download the presentation slides there as well. Thank you for attending this workshop. The CVRC Grants Department is available to answer any questions that you may have. Please know that we are here to help organizations be successful in implementing your awards, so do not hesitate to reach out for assistance and answers. We thank all of you for the important work you do in supporting New Mexico's victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, and we wish you a successful fiscal year.